Under the shadow of the Hollywood sign, stars paved the sidewalks rather than the firmament above. Southern California was practically the only home I'd ever known, and so at 16 years of age, Florida proved as alien a landscape as they come. My parents had seen me off on the charter bus, which departed from Los Angeles International Airport, and slept a little in the 3 consecutive days it took to drive the I-10 from California to Merritt Island. But how could I? A missionary family in Kenya was prepared to host me over the following 3 months. And as an appetizer, Teen Missions International, which contended for an outstretched globe as its logo, afforded me my very first glimpse of a rocket launch from Cape Canaveral. This was 1997, and I can say with assurance now, 2 decades later, that there on Cape Canaveral, I was watching the occult in action. I simply didn't know it yet. The pieces hadn't come into play, and yet the rocket, which leapt upwards for the heavens, never sat right with my spirit. The thing is, it went up, and then it went down again. That pretty much sums it up. What unfolded before me was a clear arch of flame and smoke. I even said as much. Did it land in the ocean? I'll never forget the older gentleman standing near me. I can still recall the double row of teeth exposed below his onion mustache as he snarled. It went over the curve of the earth. They were nice teeth. I squinted both eyes upon the horizon, where the rocket was apparently entering space rather than splashing down, and saw answers. To the man with the mustache, I was simply uneducated as to the shape of the earth. And in a way I was. I've said this before, I truly believe I've always been a flat earthist. Always. I never believed the Copernican narrative. I just didn't have a context for it. I guess you could say there was no alternative. I often think about the gentleman from Merritt Island, Florida. I've considered calling him up to let him know I've become a dissenter, and I may get around to it. If I've delayed, it's only because I prefer telling him in person, so that I might stare at his perfect teeth, which will surely be exposed below his onion mustache, to tell him that and more. To tell him his home state of Florida is so flat, it's an embarrassment to spherical Earth. An outhouse is a useful tool for the proper disposal of human waste when no plumbing is made available, but an abominable place to become confidentially affectionate with, or dare I say, fond of. I can't help but wonder if that little shack atop the grassy knoll, the initials WC for a name, complete with a squatting stool and dreadfully small hole for late night aiming, both of which were generally caked with several shades and textures of fecal batter, as a rule, still stands. From its hill I could gaze immediately east over the thorny caps of yellow fever trees, which giraffes often congregated under, dozens at a time, and to Lake Naivasha, with its legion of hippos, perhaps half a kilometer beyond. This scene unfolded in the Rift Valley of Kenya, and I can still smell, even now, while recounting WC 2 decades later, the nauseating fumes which would arise from its hellish hole in the ground as I lay over it heaving with an inconsolable sickness and trembling from the cold. At 16 years of age and 135 pounds, I was told I had begun to resemble a skeleton, and yet, after ejecting 30 pounds of body weight, there had been at least 9 weeks of vomiting, always under the crystalline night sky. The muscle spasms didn't agonize anymore as they had probably intended. I felt no pain. Truth be known, I looked forward to my nights, particularly the intervening moments between vomiting, when I could lie upon the grass gazing up at the glorious girdle of stars. On a cloudless night, there was no hiding from the Milky Way. Its brilliance was simply incommunicable to a teenager who had only familiarized himself trampling upon sidewalks glazed with stars, all of which blazed for a moment at a time and then fell under the shadow of the Hollywood sign. Beyond the hill where WC stood, the ghost-like glow of hyena eyes, matched with their whooping wails, haunted the agonizing yip of zebras they preyed upon. A warthog occasionally bullied a nearby bush. There were occasions when I was unable to leave my tent behind, even to vomit, due to a hippo which might toddle up the hill from Lake Naivasha to idle between myself and the outhouse. And dare I overlook those hunted zebras, which violently stampeded my tent. But the stars, what could I do but worship my Lord who fancied them as blueprints in his mind before the beginning of time? There was this one moment, after the current of vomit had steadied, that I listened in to the gruesome gnashing of hippo fangs between two competitors in the nearby lagoon and lifted my eyes to the heavens. I verbally praised him for the distant suns nestled within an infinite universe quadrillions of miles away and the plurality of hidden worlds which must have surrounded them. God was guiding me, this I know. So much so that, as I lay there lifting up my voice, God stopped me. "No, that's not true," he said in so many words. The scolding hurt. What had I said wrong? Recollections of my childhood returned to me. This present girdle of African stars was nothing like my 5-year-old counterpart admiring the 3 pale luminaries which Orion's belt offered through the smoggy canopy of Hawthorne, California, a suburb of Los Angeles International Airport. But at least then, I also heard the Lord's guiding instructions. I recall climbing out of our Plymouth Voyager, the very same model they've got on display now in the Smithsonian, when I recognized God's unexpected yet wholly welcome voice. What I was looking at, if I understood him right, was something like a sheet or the canvas of a tent pulled over us, and the stars were its chandeliers. Heaven, I was quite convinced in my budding years, was just on the other side of that canvas. If the moon looked as though it simply hung there with the grin of a Cheshire cat, it's because little of what I was being otherwise taught was true. All God had to do was peel that covering in the sky, and there would be no more need for a sun. How do I know it was the Lord instructing me? Or in the case of Kenya, disciplining my misguided praise? It's because his guidance corresponded with the written word. Oh no, not the New International Version kept next to my sleeping bag. Naturally, I was rather confused by the contradictions. Why wouldn't the Lord welcome my praise regarding an unseen deluge of galaxies? Problem was, I hadn't thought to consider astronomy with the King James Version as my cherished guide. That is, the Textus Receptus, or received text, and wouldn't for many years to come. I knew nothing concerning the occult pairing of Westcott and Hort, and their Vatican-approved Codex Sinaiticus and Codex Vaticanus texts, by which all other translations came into being. I knew not the Hebrew, despite a vague familiarity with the word firmament, but it did not win the part in my Bible translations. The New International Version has this to say of Psalm 19:1. The heavens declare the glory of God. The skies proclaim the work of his hands. The New Living Translation also pronounced skies, while the ESV declares sky above, and both the NASB and ISV claim their expanse. The Authorized King James Version gets it right. The KJV says firmament. The heavens declare the glory of God, and the firmament sheweth his handiwork. Psalm 19:1. We can thank the translators of the New International Version for altering Scripture itself. Their antagonism towards God's geocentric creation is most evident in Isaiah 38:8, whereas sunlight is falsely described as having traveled back 10 steps on a stairway rather than what actually occurred. The sun itself returned 10 degrees in the sky. The King James Bible correctly tells, "Behold, I will bring again the shadow of the degrees, which has gone down in the sundial of Ahaz, 10 degrees backward. So the sun returned 10 degrees, by which degrees it was gone down. Isaiah 38:8. The New International Version is a product of the Copernican universe. I will make the shadow cast by the sun go back the 10 steps it has gone down on the stairway of Ahaz. So the sunlight went back the 10 steps it had gone down. Isaiah 38:8, according to the NIV. The NASB also unashamedly states, so the sun's shadow went back 10 steps. In The Greatest Lie on Earth, Proof That Our World is Not a Moving Globe, author Edward Hendry writes regarding the NIV translators, they have removed the miracle of the event entirely by stating that the shadow went back 10 steps on a stairway, rather than 10 degrees on a sundial. A shadow cast by a pillar can go up and then back down steps due to the ordinary travel of the sun across the sky. However, the sun cast upon a sundial cannot move backwards unless the sun moves backwards. No, that's not true. God stopped my prayer in Kenya. The stars were not distant suns nestled within an infinite universe quadrillions of miles away. The 3 stars of Orion's belt, piercing through the electric glow and smog of Hawthorne, California, sprung to mind. I'm right here. To the west of the hill where WC stood, a handsome Maasai, though rather short for his East African ethnicity, operated a dutiful fire. Daniel was his name. The local Maasai village, maintained with mud, manure, and a convenient briar patch, couldn't have been more than 2 or 3 kilometers away. Daniel, he never bothered me, but he conscientiously kept watch over the fire and me. I never recall him intervening in my habitual sickness, except to gesture with a hand if I felt up to joining his crackling orb of light, wiping whatever bile remained on my lips as I approached, and its ashy glow illuminated a face equally as kind. Even then, my guardian rarely spoke unless I initiated conversation. Usually we were content just sitting and listening, stargazing. His English was good. He never brought up the vomit, which must have plagued him with concern, but I preferred listening to his Swahili tongue if he offered it. There were, of course, our adventures during the day to consider. They could be practically comedic at times, chasing down a tribe of baboons who'd run off with cans of food from the storage shed. It really happened. And then at night he'd captivate me with stories, like the lion he killed with only a sharpened stick. There was, of course, the other lion, which he only thought to mention on the morning after it had walked right past WC and the tent, paw prints for proof. That lion, by the way, was hunted later in the day. Its crime, eating human. The stories I could tell. I can't help but wonder if Daniel entered the ministry, if he this very moment pastors an East African church, as he confessed aspiring to do. His dutiful service to me, managing that little fire near the outhouse on the hill while the Lord guided me in deconstructing the Copernican universe, is not even quantifiable except by heavenly standards. Actually, I put little thought into those glorious Rift Valley skies until years later, 2 decades actually, when the missing pieces of the puzzle finally came together and the truth no longer needed to be suppressed. Fact is, the universe became an uncomfortable back pocket subject. I simply wouldn't. No, I couldn't give God praise for something so indescribably delightful, but which the Lord also rebuked me for doing. God is so good and loving and patient that he would think to correct me in error, even over a great chasm of time. By his providence alone, I finally opened up a King James Bible and discovered the joyous cosmology. It read, "The heavens declare the glory of God." Even now I can close my eyes and recognize Daniel's kind face flushed with the heat of ember. A spear adorns his arm. The whooping wails of hyenas still advertise the hunt. And if I look up, it is the firmament of his power which garnishes my gaze.